Hello and welcome to Evolving on Purpose, a show I have created in hopes that I can inspire you to take the deep dive into discovering who you are and what you came here to do. Each week, I will have on individuals to share their unique journey to self-discovery and where their purpose is taking them. I will also do solo episodes to share what I am currently learning, practicing, or even just contemplating. So come on, what are you waiting for? Join me in Evolving on Purpose. Hello, today I have Zia. I met him in the podcasters group that I'm a part of. And as soon as I saw his podcast and started going down gently down the river, is that it right?
Gently down the stream.
Gently down the stream. Gently
like
down
row
the
your
stream.
boat.
Yes, I started going gently down the stream and was immediately hooked and had to have Zia on the podcast so that I could share him with you. And I want you all to listen to his podcast and then yell at him to do more episodes so we can hear more. Zia, can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. When I was 7, I'll start there. I had a piano in my house and I started playing on it and I started writing songs, just naturally writing songs. And that was the start of my creative journey, which took me through college where I continued to do that. And eventually this sort of creativity passioned into, that's a new term. I'm going to use that one, passioned into a career in IT. And I worked for IBM for a number of years, got bored of that. But my favorite thing about it was teaching people things. So I decided to become a teacher and I taught grades 3, 4, and 5. And then that was an incredible opportunity because it allowed me to do something I was very passionate about. But the only problem is when you do something you're really passionate about, it can sometimes take over your entire life. So I left teaching and I worked for Microsoft for a number of years in their education division, training teachers in using Microsoft technology. Through that job, I presented at a college and was hired by someone in the room to be an adjunct professor. And so like one thing leads to another. And through that, was exposed to the coaching program at this school, which is Anne Arundel Community College, best community college in the nation, according to Forbes, or at least of last year. And was trained as a life and engagement coach. And that is mostly what I do now. I teach, I'm a professor, so I have that teaching background. I have a master's in teaching, but I also do coaching and I have a coaching business where I have a lot of clients on a regular basis. And mostly what I help people do is career transitions, or as I like to call them, career pivots, moving from one career direction where you're like on this track and you're like, you know what, I need out of this track. I'm going to switch to something new. But how do I do that? There's a lot of steps involved in doing that. So that's what I help people navigate right now with my coaching skills. But there are many other things that I'm interested in helping people with when it comes to my coaching skills, because they can be applied to almost any situation. So does that give you a good enough enough history?
I love that. I love seeing the progression and it just kind of makes me think, how were you able to pivot? Because you coach people to make these pivots. And now it's like, well, how did you do it? Did you get into kind of some fear or some, where am I going to go next? Or how did you navigate that?
I think it all started for me way before any transition with the book, The War of Art. Do you know this book?
Oh my gosh, I love this book. I'm about to reread it.
Oh yeah. It's one of those books that it's worth a reread every half year, whatever it is, because it's short and you can do it really quickly. A lot of the Seth Godin books, I'm returning to a lot of the Seth Godin books now. I don't know if you know Lynchpin, but it's a book that was heavily based on War of Art.
No, I haven't read that one, but I'll write it down.
Yeah, that's a good one to read. But it started there because that book is all about pushing through creative resistance. When you make things like you do, like I do, there's always this resistance that comes with putting something out into the world that may make you vulnerable and may make you seem, may not be as well received as you think it is as you're making it. And so that book is all about like, how do you just take the next step? How do you just do the process, focus on the journey rather than worrying about what's going to come out at the end of the rainbow? And I kind of installed that mentality in my head. And so when I started thinking about a new career, it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to switch right now. Like, I am going to start applying for jobs. It was, what's really important right now? Like, what is actually coming up for me what am I dissatisfied with in my current job? What's missing in my whole life? Right. Because we often talk about this work life balance, but in the last few years, there's been like a work life bleed, I would say. And I've heard that term used in other places. So it started with just exploring the idea, and for me, it happened to be a lunch that I had with somebody. They worked for a teacher training organization, and they said, here's our program. In case you're interested, you could check this brochure out and come to an info session. I think I went to an info session, if I'm not mistaken, or I checked out the website or something. And then from there, it was like, well, what's the next step? Where is the point where I have to actually make the leap? I'm all about getting to that point, because if I'm applying for a job, I haven't made a decision to leave anything yet. I haven't made a decision to transition. I'm just applying for something new. I'm just exploring. It's that point where they say to you, okay, now's the chance that you get to make the leap. And I will tell you something that I did that I think will tie into this, the topic of our podcast nicely, if that's okay, a quick story, which is I was on the metro in DC. That's like the subway, the underground train station. I was going to my old job, and I had just received the letter saying, hey, you've been accepted to the program. Do you want to do it? You have to respond within like a week or something. And so I'm sitting on the metro, and I had already talked to my wife about the financial details because it would have been a pretty big pay cut from what I was used to as a consultant with IBM. And I was sitting on the metro, and I never do this, but I looked up and I asked the universe for a sign. And I was just in my mind like, universe, if I'm meant to do this, give me a sign. And I thought this is going to be the way I decide whether or not to pivot. And I kind of laughed about it because, maybe I'll see something that'll make me sort of be like, ooh, that's the sign, this small smudge on the wall. And I'll backwards work it into my narrative. But I get off the train, and there are signs everywhere. There's signs on the walls. There are signs on the little like metro, what do they call them? The little metro like pillars that say the metro name. There are signs on the floor, like on near the where the train goes. And all of them say these things. And I kid you not, they say things like, leap and the net will appear. You were born for this. Like, this is your moment. This is your opportunity. And they were ads for Strayer University, which I believe is an online university. But I kind of looked at them and I thought, you know what? Like, I know that this is sort of just fortuitous, and perhaps these signs would have been here anyway. But I tuned into them today for a reason. And there was a reason, and it spoke to me, and I decided to make the leap. So it's a little bit of logistical planning, but it's also a little bit of intuition.
Yeah. It makes me think. I have a friend that always is like, just ask for a sign, but she'll make a specific sign, right? Like, ask to see this bird or to see this, And I'm just like, if I ask to see that, my mind is going to look for that all day long. And it probably is all around me. So I always hated that ask for a sign. But then I started doing it more like you. And it's just like, give me a sign, but not putting something on it. And then it's like, okay, now I'm open to this message from the universe instead of just my mind looking for this blue feather or bird or something.
And it makes me wonder what the difference is, right? Like, when we ask the universe for something, who are we asking? I mean, perhaps it could be God if you're religious. It could be just the general energy of things, whatever it might be. But for me, it's like I'm almost internally inquiring into myself and saying, let me be open to stimulus right now. Let me be open to what this world is telling me and how it can play with and engage with these parts of my brain that I'm not actively focused on at the moment. How can I bring that into focus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes me think about, a lot of people will pull cards or flip a coin or, any of these things that give them more clarity, right? And I always say, go for it. But it always gives me more clarity, because if the card doesn't say what I wanted it to say, that gives me clarity, right? Oh, I really wanted this, right? It's just like,
Yep.
Okay, so do ask for a sign, ask for, pull a card or flip a coin if you have a decision. And if it's heads and you wanted it to be tails, then you kind of
Yeah.
still have your answer, right?
Very informative, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's kind of wrapping back to the topic that we were kind of talking about. We were going to talk about contemplation. And I've just been thinking about it a lot. And I had mentioned to you that I've got to get this book now by Richard Rudd. And he says contemplation is the most important thing that we do. And he has this book called The Art of Contemplation. So I will be purchasing that. We'll
I'm
talk
writing it down
about
right
that
now.
another time, maybe.
Yeah.
But Richard Rudd, so I teach human design, and it's just about figuring out who you are, what you came here to do. And I feel like it's using these tools to contemplate, who am I? And if it feels right, if you can connect to it, it's kind of the same thing. But Richard Rudd took it to another level, and he took each of these gates and put it in this long form contemplation that you can contemplate on one gift that you came here with and just sit there and read about that. Like, this is one of my gifts, and I just contemplate it, and then I look for it in my life. Does it show up naturally? Am I showing up? There's a high level and a low level, where you'd show up. And so am I showing up in a lower vibration of that gift? Am I showing up in the high? How? And I just feel like having something. And there's lots of ways to contemplate. Do you have other ways that you contemplate?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was when we were talking in our kind of pre-show meeting, I had mentioned that I had been to a lecture recently about contemplation, a short lecture, 45 minutes, an hour long. And one of the things that really occurred to me when I heard this person talking about their work and contemplation was that I had always thought contemplation means thinking, right? We contemplate something. There's even the word temple in there, right? And um, the way he described it was contemplation is the direct experience of something. And so there's kind of two sides to this for me. One is that I find when I'm when I'm contemplating the types of things that you were mentioning before, what gifts do I have? The ways that I like to think about it is there are many entryways to figure out what's important and what you value, because that's how I see these vibrations. They're what value, what are my core values that if I don't honor, there's going to be a lack. There's going to be a lack in my life, and I need to do something to honor those values. Everybody has values, but the core ones are the ones, if you don't value those, if you don't honor those on a regular basis, you will feel this lack. So there's a few ways to get into that. And one is thinking about people that you admire. Likely, if you admire qualities in somebody, they are agreeing with your core values. If you think about things that bother you, that piss you off and irritate you, the opposite of those things, according to you, because that's subjective, the opposite of those things are maybe core values, because that thing that's really bothering you is rubbing against your core values. You look for the other end of it, and all of a sudden you're finding what that vibration is. Then the question is, how do you actually honor those things more regularly? And that takes a little bit of the part of your brain that does executive planning. The intuitive part can tune into like, what really speaks to me about somebody? What do I admire about somebody? What bothers me? But the part of your brain that plans is the part, this is now, what do I do with that? Where do I take that? How do I increase that energy? And I love the book Atomic Habits. Do you know that one, James
I
Clear? Yeah,
do. I do. It's
very
such a good one.
popular.
Yes.
Yeah, so good. But that core tenet of, I'm going to take the smallest step possible. Like, if I'm going to learn, if I honor my health, I want to honor my health, and part of that for me is flossing my teeth or working out. Maybe I put on my shoes and I just walk into the gym and I come back. I've done this before when I've tried to get back into working out. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to put on my shoes, walk into the gym, and then walk back home. And I've done that before. The next time I do it, I'm just going to go up the stairs, because my gym had stairs at the time. And one thing leads to another, and now I have a now I have a home gym that I spent a lot of money on, that allows me to work out whenever I want, and a Peloton that's in the next room over there.
Yeah.
Hopefully that didn't go too much on a side
No,
mission there.
I love that. I did a course in transpersonal psychology, and you had to take all these classes, dream classes, meditation classes, all of that. But we also did talk about, like, how do you find your purpose? How do you find what you want to be in life. We did learn principles such as the Enneagram and human design and things like that I use. But that was one of my favorite exercises, and I completely forgot about it. So for anybody that wants to know, how can I figure out my values and how can I put more intention, doing this, making a list of people that you really admire. It could be a celebrity, it could be somebody in your life, but that you really admire, and then write down what it is that they're doing that you really, maybe pick 5 qualities or 4 qualities. I don't know if you have a preference for your clients, but write down those qualities and then find people that bug you. And it always makes me laugh, because have you heard of that mirroring, where anybody that you're talking to, you're always mirroring. They're mirroring.
Oh yeah, the mirroring principle. Yes.
Yeah. And so if you tell me that somebody's bothering you, I think, what in you are they reflecting? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I don't usually say that because most people just want to vent. Right.
Sure.
But that's the work. Write down those people that really bother you and what is it about them. And sometimes it's really not good stuff. They're not truthful, or they're not this, but you have to kind of do the work to see, where are you not being truthful? Where are you? Because it's only bothering you because you see it in it's there, right?
And in this work, have you ever experienced this phenomenon, I'll call it, where you start doing this work and you think about, well, what is being reflected in me? And you mentioned the work, so I'm imagining you're referring to the work by
Byron Katie.
Byron Katie, thank you. I was going to say Katie something. Byron Katie.
Yes, I love her.
And I've seen videos of her students kind of saying, my mother-in-law is XYZ, and then they'll change it and they'll say, I am XYZ. And it's interesting because it's not necessarily like, oh, really, it's just that I don't like parts about myself. It is still issues that you might have with another person.
Yeah.
But you're looking internally. And have you ever experienced this phenomenon where you start doing this work, you get more acquainted with your own quirks and your own things that you want to work on, and then you meet somebody who you don't like, quote unquote, and you suddenly start to say to yourself, oh, well, they're dealing with the same thing too, right? They're not a bad person, and it's not that I don't like them. Our energies don't necessarily mesh well sometimes, but I can change part of the equation. There's 2 sides of this energy equation. There's you and there's me, and I can change my energy. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to repair our relationship or that we're going to be best friends. But there's this opening that happens. There's this like ease that happens when you sort of think to yourself, it's an energy issue. It's not a you versus me issue. I feel like so many of the world's problems could be solved if we just adhered to that mentality. And I'm not to say that I'm great at sticking to believing that every single minute of the day. But
we are human having a human experience, and I accept myself as human and flawed and all of that. But yes, I think the more that we bring awareness, the more that we bring intention, the more that we focus on what we want and not so much what we don't want, the world does change. The world does look different. Have you seen, I noticed this because I was working a 9-to-5 job and I really wanted out. And so for me, transforming from that 9-to-5 job to what I'm doing now, it was kind of a leap, right? Like, I wanted to coach people and help people and do this very, very different thing. And I was working in accounting, right? So it was a very different thing. And so I was always trying to refocus my attention. I listened to a lot of podcasts to try to bring that energy in. I did all of the classes. I did all the work. I did it all while I was working. But when I would go online and see people that were doing what I wanted to do, I was so negative towards them. And somebody had said, like, if don't listen to the haters, because when people are actually showing up and doing it, they don't have time to hate on you or to, And I just thought, oh my gosh, that is so me. And as soon as I started doing it and putting my own content out and making these videos and podcasting and stuff, I have so much more compassion for the people doing it. I don't even look at people like that anymore. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever experienced that.
It's always such a, I mean, this goes back to the war of art. It's always such an interesting experience to say, I'm going to put something new out into the world. There are times late at night where, I'll have this whole content calendar and I have this whole system, and I'm a very systems oriented person. I mean, if you saw my screen right now, you'd cry. Maybe not you. Maybe you're
Oh,
similar to
I'm
me,
the
but
opposite. So
yeah. So there's some people that look at my systems and they're just like, what? Like my wife is kind of like sometimes like, why all the detail? Why all the intricacy? She's very accepting of me, but it's confusing to some people.
yeah,
And sometimes I sit late at night and I look at these lists and I think, uh, you know, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to put this stuff out. I'm going to have these conversations, and people are going to think like, oh, he's trying to be this particular, he's trying to be this influencer, or maybe there's a little bit of like my influence says in my voice, and maybe people will pick up on that, and I get very self conscious. But like you're saying, it's almost like the people that are out there doing it, they don't really think about that. They don't really care. They just kind of produce. It's interesting. I used to be a lot more free flowing in my early 20s. I don't know what happened. I think it was around the time I started teaching that I got a little bit more guarded. It could be because in the classroom, you kind of have to be a version of yourself that is, um, well, you kind of section off the parts of you that are super duper vulnerable, at least when you're in front of kids, or students. And you do that in an effort to give them the best learning experience possible. But I almost wonder if that conditioned me to stop being so, free flowing with the stuff that I publish and put out there. I don't know.
I I've had a lot. I did the podcast, my third podcast. We talked about, they brought forward shamanic practices and how they have an altar in witchcraft, and I was like, oh my gosh, am I really going to put this out? Right? Like I
Yeah.
go to basketball and soccer with my kids and all the families around me. What if they saw this, and what if they thought differently of me? But I'm just, and that's what we were kind of talking about, like mystic Christianity and mystic traditions.
Yep.
I was looking up the definition of mystic because I didn't really know it. I just knew that I prefer like a mystic Christianity book over maybe
Sure.
reading the Bible. It's just, to me, religion has a lot more structure, right? It's like, do this and you get here. And some
Right.
people need that and they feel good in that. I love the unknown. I love the mystery of life. I love knowing that this world is infinite and that there's every possibility out there.
Mm.
And so
That gives
that's
me chills.
it's what I'm trying to bring, but I want to bring it to everybody, right? And if it's
Yeah.
not for you, I mean, don't listen, that's fine. But if you do want to crack open those walls a little bit and see that, like, my best friend, she's really good at seeing like endless possibilities. And I wish everybody had a best friend like that, because I'm sitting here, I had little kids, I'm in a 9-to-5 job, and I'm like, I know where I want to be, but it doesn't seem possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would love everybody to know that anything is possible. There's infinite possibilities out there.
Yeah. Do you know the difference between dialectical thinking and relativistic thinking?
I don't know those words at all, so please
Oh,
tell
okay.
me.
So I taught developmental psychology last semester. I don't normally teach this particular. I have taught psychology before to education majors. This was a different type of semester. I was called into a class where a professor had left. Anyway, what that meant was some of the material I had to learn with the students. I mean, spoiler alert to anybody who's ever had a college course before, likely your professor has learned, unless they're super experienced and like have been in the field forever, there's some stuff they're learning with you.
I have a cup that
Anyway,
says always learning, and I feel like every teacher should be always learning, right? Like you should
that's what makes a good
always,
teacher.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I learn more from my students sometimes than they learn from me, and that's okay. That's actually good,
Yeah.
because then they're learning too, from themselves. But the difference, as I understand it, is that I have a friend who thinks in a very dialectical way. In other words, there are different points of view, and he's always trying to understand the other side of something. Like if he believes something, he's like, who disagrees with me? I want to understand their point really deeply so I can make sense of this. That's his way of making sense. And he tries to find this common ground between those two views. I think it's beautiful.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think that way. I'm a completely different thinker. I'm a relativistic thinker in that I believe there is no right, there is no truth. We make our own truth. I've said this to my friend before. I've said before, truth is subjective. And he laughs at me because he does not see it that way. He thinks truth can be arrived at. And I respect that view, right? There are probably people listening to this that believe that. And I respect that. I just believe in the same way I think that you're referring to this infinite out there, that it's possible to have very conflicting truths, and both of these things can be true. So I asked my friend once, well, give me something true. Who decides what's true? Tell me, give me something. Give me an example of something that is absolutely true that we would both say is absolutely true. The whole world would agree is true. And he said, well, how about 2 + 2 is 4? And that kind of stopped me for a minute because I was like, well, I guess that is true in that the world would say that 2 + 2 = 4. But then I thought a little deeper about it and I said, why is 2 + 2 = 4 true? It's true because we agree that it's true, right? If we didn't agree that 2 + 2 = 4 is true, we wouldn't be able to have commerce or trade or transactions or pay for things or know the value of things. And our economies, our world, the way we communicate and work with each other would kind of shut down if we didn't agree on that principle. We agree on it out of convenience. But is it true? I don't know.
I love this so much. I'm like a little kid in a candy shop right now. Like I could talk about this stuff all day. It just makes me think about we talk about how we have this group consciousness, right? Have you learned about that at all? Okay. So
I think
we
it's
have
Alan
this
Watts. At least he talks about it.
yeah, so we have
Yeah.
this group consciousness. We have this consciousness floating around, and we bring in other people's thoughts and ideas and things like that. But we do, as a society, we agree on certain perimeters. And if we didn't agree on it, it would be chaos. But in the same way, if everybody would just like open up and have infinite possibilities, we all could. And instead, we have to go against the grain when we want to think about this. And it does make it a little bit harder to create these infinite possibilities. But I think that's why it's so important to have all these people that are kind of pushing the boundaries, that are making people think in a different way. But truth to me is that there is no truth. I'm with you with that. I think that it's very subjective. Have you seen that study? And I really need to look at it and read it because I love to bring it up. But it's a quantum physics study where the scientists, they put electrons through a
Double slit. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was like when they were focused on it and they knew what it was going to do, it did it. But then when they weren't, it didn't act the same way. And that
Particles
is truth
waves.
to me, right? Like that's truth.
Right.
What I believe, what I focus on, what I intend is how the particles are going to move. And that's what I've been moving through my body. I've been had health issues for a long time. And I kept thinking, when I'm healthy, I can live my life. When I'm healthy, I can do these things. And I knew about like the law of attraction and different things. But it's really hard when your body is exhausted to push past that, right? But I just kept taking little steps and little steps. And when I really stopped working and doing a bunch of stuff that I really hated, all of a sudden I had more energy. But now I'm being more intentional about it. I'm telling my body, you can heal. I'm telling my body, this is what I want you to do. And I'm focusing on that. And now I've dropped all these habits out of nowhere. I don't even have to think about it because that's what I'm intending. I'm intending my body to be healthy. I'm intending to move more fluidly, and I make choices easily in that direction.
I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a video of that explains different dimensions, right? So like, you're probably familiar with what the second dimension is. Third dimension is kind of the world we exist in.
Yep.
Fourth dimension is sometimes described as time, which Wrinkle in Time, that book is what introduced me to that concept. Great book, by the way. If you haven't reread it in a while, it's stunning. It's beautiful. It's absolutely, to me, a mystic text. And if you haven't read it in a while, do not, I repeat, watch the movie that came out recently. I was very let down. Well, it's up to you. If you want to check it out, check it out. Very cool. They had diverse casting. It was a different way of telling the story, but it completely let me down. The graphic novel that came out a few years ago, though, that is phenomenal. I recommend checking that out to anybody who's interested in a read. But anyway, in that story, they explain quantum physics in a way that children can understand because it's a children's book. And they describe time as this fourth dimension. And there's two things that I think about when I think about that fourth dimensional view is I couldn't comprehend when I read that book. What does that mean? Fourth dimension is time. Okay, I know what time is. I know what time it is. What does that mean though? And I watched a video late, and this is on YouTube. It's been on YouTube for like 15 years. I watched this in high school, I think. Even before YouTube existed, it was online somewhere where a guy is walking through all the different dimensions and what they mean. And with the fourth dimension, he was like, think of it like this undulating snake. There's where you were born, there's where you die. Those are the two ends. And you are traveling along this dimension of time as you go throughout. Okay, now, if you fold that, you get the fifth dimension. And I know this might be hard to conceptualize on a podcast, but imagine now you are moving through time and you are changing the trajectory of things based on the decisions you're making. I don't know how to best explain this because I barely understand it, but it's almost like if I just decide right now to pick up this little tweezer that's on my desk, that just changed the direction I'm going in time, right? Or maybe it didn't change the direction I'm going in time. Maybe it changed the direction I'm going in the fifth dimension because now I'm making choices that are changing the structure of things. And so that whole question of do we have free will or is it all just kind of planned out sort of gets stopped in its tracks because it's just sort of irrelevant when you think of it that way, I think. And then the second thing is, do you have children? I don't remember if
Yes.
I think we did talk about this. Okay,
yeah.
So I have two kids as well. And when my son was born, my older son, I remember that I looked at him and I thought to myself, like, I will always think of you as a baby. Like I even when you're like 35, and I bet my parents when they look at me, they think of me as a baby. They'd see me as an adult, but I'm sure they look at me and they just know like I am that baby that just happened to grow up. Just happened to be human and go through time. But also I looked at him and I thought, I will always see you as like every version of yourself. I look at you in this sort of fourth dimensional way sometimes. I see you as you are now as this baby in a crib. I see you as a 5-year-old. I see you as a 10-year-old. I see you as a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, a 50-year-old. Like, it is so bizarre having kids because you like obviously you don't know who they're going to be or what they're going to become. But the way that I see him in time and space is different than I see other people. It is, and my second child too. I don't know what it is. It's hard to explain, but I guess that's kind of the theme of this conversation.
Yeah,
Things we can't explain with words.
Well, which is what mysticism is. That is literally what mysticism said. Is like we don't have words for it, so they use vague terms to allow the mystery.
Well, and we were talking about that lecture, the contemplation being a direct experience of life. I asked the question, so what's mysticism? Because I thought that's what mysticism was. And the guy said, I wish I remembered his name now. I have it written down somewhere. But he said that mysticism is the creative expression of that direct experience. So if you're Alan Watts and you've experienced had this direct experience, you believe in this idea of group consciousness and you've experienced it, and then you go and give a talk about it to other people or make a podcast about it, that could be categorized as mysticism.
I love
the
that.
Creative expression of the direct experience of life.
I love that. We're both mystics in this world, right?
It's so funny that because like I wrote down a book title once of a book I would maybe write one day. I don't think I actually thought I'll write this book, but my wife is Jewish and we always have had these conversations about when we have kids. I grew up Muslim. And my family's not like, very devout or anything like that. But, I attended Eid ceremonies. And when I was a kid, I would go to what we call Jamaat Khana, which is like the Muslim version of, or the Shia version of church, really, every Friday. And so we thought, what are we going to tell our kids? And so I came up with this book title, Mom's Jewish, Dad's Pisces, because I really connect to the Pisces archetype, which I am. I was born March 4th.
I love that. My son is like triple Pisces and all over. And I'm just like, what did I do? What do I do with this Pisces?
I know it's hard to know, right? We're kind of like the chameleon of the zodiac. But I say this because um lately I've been thinking, well, what is it? I'm not really, it's Pisces is not like a belief system necessarily. It's an archetype. So what is it that I believe? And so I've been saying lately to my son, well, I'm a mystic. And it sounds so grandiose or something because
I
I
know.
think you think of mystic and it sounds like, oh, this like magic and all this stuff, and it's like, no, it's not. It's actually not that impressive, honestly. It just means that I'm open to possibility. It just means that I'm constantly in awe of things, and that's what grounds me. That's what keeps me connected to the whole flow of energy in the universe. And just like, I imagine Christianity or Judaism or Islam would do for a practitioner of those faiths. Even though I don't think of mysticism as a faith. In fact, we were talking about how it transcends faith in some ways and transcends religion, in that almost every major religion has its own version of mysticism. In Islam, there's Sufism. If you've ever heard the poet Rumi, Rumi is a mystic poet and a Sufi, and a Muslim. And in the Christian faith, I mean, there's probably like Aquinas, I think, right, would be categorized, I believe.
I'm not sure. I just know Christian mystics writings
Yeah,
and teachings.
I want to say Richard Rohr is
Yeah.
writes a lot about it, or is a Christian
Yeah.
mystic as well. And then in Judaism, there's Kabbalah or Kabbalah, I don't know how you pronounce it. And in Buddhism, there's Zen, and I would assume, and I want to say Shinto is another one. Um, that is a mystic. I'm not totally sure. I don't want to misspeak here, but regardless, in every religion, it seems to me there's always this version of like, hey, we have this structured, organized thing, and then there are people that are like, oh, we don't like this structured, organized thing because it's so limiting. And how do we know? We're so, we're pretty powerful as humans, but also we're so infinite, infinitesimal even. And that dichotomy is, to me, is really beautiful, that push and pull.
It made me laugh so hard when I was in college. I went back to college after I had gone to college, like a university, and then I joined the Navy, and then I came back, and I was going to this community college, not quite sure what direction I was going. And the community college taught a world religion. And I loved the class. I love living, like, I kind of see myself as that Life of Pi. Is it Life of Pi where
That's a movie. I haven't seen it, but yeah.
yeah, there's a book too. And the kid, I think he might be Muslim, but he loves God so much that he goes and trains under every faith so he can see
Huh.
God in all his
I'm
faces.
gonna write this down. I want to see
It's
this.
a really beautiful book. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of who I am. I love world religion because I love seeing all the different faces, what other people connect to, and all of that. But the instructor was very fundamental Christian. Like he thought he was teaching us world religion to teach us Christianity was correct. And I just
Wow.
was watching him teach this. And I'm like, how does he not see that they all have the same string and they're all there for everybody to find themselves in a different way?
Yeah.
God didn't put one person here. He put all of these people here to teach in different ways so everybody could find what worked for them. And that it's still happening today with, you could read Richard Rohr, or you could do Byron Katie, or you could do, and I love them all, right? Like that's just who I am. I want to see it in every direction. And some people want to pick one lane, but they have a lane because there's so many different ways.
It's I don't know if how old are your kids? I can't remember.
12 and 10.
Right. I think we did talk. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they probably asked a bunch of questions. Years ago, I had a video that I made. My wife was babysitting for this family that we were really close to, and their oldest son at the time was 9. And I started talking to him about the meaning of life. And we're sitting in his backyard, and he's pointing to these ants that were like on the patio. And he's saying, these ants are unaware that we're even here right now. And, and maybe we're like that to some other beings, and I was just like, that's pretty. I was like, can I film this?
Pretty
And
profound.
at the time, I didn't really understand like ethics of like filming children. So I was like, can I film this? Like, he's like, sure. So I filmed him talking about this, and I edited it, and I showed it to his parents, and his parents gave me the blessing to put it on YouTube. And a year later, it went very viral. I think like 4.5 million people watched it. I got emails from talk show hosts and like, Deepak Chopra DM'd me on Twitter and like all this
Wow.
stuff for like 2 weeks. And then it kind of like trailed off. Um, but it's interesting because it made me think about the fact that like what captured everybody's attention. Neil deGrasse Tyson watched this video. Jimmy Kimmel watched this video. Like what captured everybody's attention here? Like all these different people from different fields. And I guess what it came down to is when children are uninhibited. Now this child is 19 now. He's in college. And we just did a podcast together that hasn't been released. And I asked him like what's changed since you were 9? And he goes, I'm not like that anymore. Like I have so much more of a filter now. I for whatever reason, I just don't espouse these ideas quite as readily anymore. I'm a lot more guarded. I don't want to put words in his mouth. And it reminded me of like the other day, my son came up to me and said, "Is God real?" Now this is after a few days. Every day he asked me a new question. Is Santa real? Is the tooth fairy real? And then yesterday it was, is God real? My answer, Angela, to every single time that he asked me the question is, I've never seen him, but he could be,
Yeah.
or she could be the tooth
Yeah.
fairy.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't know. Do you have any go-to answers for when, when, because I don't want to ruin the joy of Christmas for anybody, or take away from the fun of the tooth fairy, or even the fun of God, honestly.
Yeah.
So what do you say?
Oh man, my kids didn't ask that much, but I wasn't the kind. My sister and different people will be like make up these grand stories and they talk about it a lot, and I just kind of let them tell me, what do you think? How do you how do you think
Yeah,
Santa does it? How do you think? And that's what I always do, and that's what I do with everything. I've noticed a lot of people are struggling right now with how are we teaching our children? Are we trying to reform them? Or there's two different camps that we need to teach
sure.
them these values. Those values should be taught at home. There's this kind of debate going on in our school right now, and I just say I love when my kids learn something different outside of the home,
Yeah,
and then they come talk to me about it, and I ask them what they think. They're my
yeah.
teachers. I
Hmm.
want them to always have that. I don't want them to grow out of thinking they have to think the way society thinks or they have to think in this kind of way. And when you were talking about how you see your children and things, and I just thought, I love that I don't have any expectations for my children. They are going to surprise me so much when I see
I love it.
what they look like, how they act, who they are, but it's going to be them. That's why
Yeah.
I learned human design, because now I know I could kind of unlearn what I was taught as a child. My mom,
Mm.
wonderful, wonderful. She's a Capricorn. She wants security, safety. You have to follow the rules. And
Yeah.
I am not that person. And so I was always taught you have to have this 9 to 5 job. You have to have health insurance. You have to. And
Yep.
yes, in a way, these things are obviously necessary. We need food and health insurance and these things, but they could be done in a different way. And if my imagination is not squashed as a child and I can imagine that I can do anything,
Yeah.
wow. Like that's what I
Yeah.
that's what I teach my kids is
Oh, that's beautiful. You know how I don't know if you're familiar with when you go for training at a Zen temple, um you go in and the person that you want to kind of train you and be your teacher sometimes is known as a sensei. You probably heard that term before in pop culture, but in Zen Buddhism, the word is known as a roshi, affectionate word for your wise teacher. That this teacher will not directly teach you anything. In fact, they'll tell you, go away. Like we don't have any space for you. No one's learning here. No, you came here for the wrong reason. Sorry, but go home. And that student will camp out in front for days to show that they're committed, and eventually will be let in and just say, you can come in, but just know no one's actually learning anything here. And they come in, and pretty soon they're engaging in what is called koan training, which are these existential riddles. You've probably heard some of them before. What
yeah.
is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your face before your parents were born, or before you were born? What is moo? That's another big moo is do you know that one, the koan? It's a I won't even go into it, but it's worth looking up. It's a question that really, these are questions that don't have logical answers. You have to go into this irrational, illogical part of your brain in order to get past them. And there are correct answers, but like the student will bring in a frog. They'll get tired of like trying to come up with answers about this. Like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? The koan that was given to me is, what is the one pure and simple thing? And I was like, the universe. And the person was like, what is the universe? And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, take the I out of that. And I said, don't know. And he's like, now you're ready to begin thinking about this koan. Like, not you've solved it, but you're ready to think about it. So I say all this to say, to link it back to this idea of children being our teachers. When my second child was born, we had a really hard time settling on a name. We'd already come up with our favorite boy's name for our first child, which was Desmond. So we call him Desi. We got the name from Lost, which is another great mystical show if you have
I
not watched
enjoyed
Lost.
that show. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. It's not perfect by any means, but it's very mystical. And so we use that up. So our second child is Roshi. And the reason is because children are our best teachers. Not because necessarily they have life experience yet, but because there's an innate wisdom. Just like my 9-year-old friend that says, now I'm blocked a little bit. There's this innate wisdom and innate flowing of energy that the world or I don't know what it is, saboteurs or parts of our brain that sabotage us get in the way, and then we don't become quite as prolific. And so I always wanted to, when I refer to him, when I call him, I always want to remind myself, this is my child, and I'm in charge, and I'm an authority figure and a model for him and all of that. But he is in many ways my teacher. Both of them are. I think that's beautiful. And to say to them, if they ask a question like, is God real? To maybe question like it's hard because they're young, right? They don't know what real and not real to them is like. Oh, real means that it's happening here, and not real means it's happening in a book that's fiction. But to say to them, what are you experiencing? Because that's real. If you we went to this exhibit, this lights for the holidays, this park near us that they set up these beautiful light displays. If you walk in there and your mind is blown and your jaw is dropped and you're just in awe, who cares if God is real? That's real. Like, the
Yeah.
question becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
You're having a direct experience. You're in contemplation.
I love that. My oldest son, he gets anxiety when he thinks about space or how big the world is or God, like any of this, or what happens when you die. Like, that gives him so much anxiety. So we just don't talk about it, right? If something comes up, I ask him how he feels and we talk about that. But I don't bring my children to church, and not because I have anything against church. I was sometimes enjoyed it as a kid, sometimes I didn't. But my youngest was drawing on New Year's Eve, and he drew this picture of a person and said, God is within me. And we don't really talk about God that much. If
Wow.
I have an opportunity, we talk about it, right? But yeah. I don't push it. I want them to bring things, right? And I just thought, wow. And he's my Pisces. So
I was gonna say, is that your Pisces? Because that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, he's my Pisces. He loves thinking about
it's not
these lofty...
surprising. It's not surprising that you're Capricorn, because I have a Capricorn too. It's not surprising that you're Capricorn. I mean, he's my younger one, so his personality is still emerging. But it's not surprising that your Capricorn would be a little bit anxious about the idea of there isn't like a constraint here. There isn't like a bound. There isn't a rule. There isn't an explanation for everything.
Yeah. He loves
that's terrifying.
Sports. He loves ruled,
right.
And he's a very focused, like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go do that. He doesn't want to look at the big. And I just love seeing both of them, and they get to grow up in this atmosphere of both. My husband's an Aquarian, so he likes to look at the stars and think about those kind of things. And I'm a Gemini, so I just like it all.
Yeah. My mom's a Gemini. Yeah. I'm very familiar. I have a lot of actually relatives that are Geminis. A lot of my in-laws too. That's
can
amazing.
Be a blessing, but it can be very scattering. I'm always trying to learn the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I bring up astrology sometimes with people that I'm close to, and often the response I get is, okay, it's cool. Because what I tell them is, look, I'm not telling you that like the constellations and the stars have moved, space has expanded during, like I'm not saying that I can predict the future based on my astrology. What I can tell you is that when I go see a movie or read a book that's fiction, I get actual things out of it that translate to real life that actually help me in real life. And whether the tarot and astrology, whether it's like fiction or real or like this is the question that I say it's irrelevant. What's relevant is that if someone reads my tarot and they turn over these cards and they make a creative story out of the card, a sense out of the cards, out of these archetypes, and then that story affects me in a way that I go and change the way that I'm living or behaving, then it is useful. And
Yes.
that brings back this question of what's the difference between useful and real? If a placebo effect, right? If
Yes.
you there have been so many studies that show that if you take a sugar pill over a legitimate medicine, sometimes in some instances the placebo is more effective than the medicine by like a large number. And so what does that mean? Is that mean like we're not going to just throw out this placebo effect like, oh well, it doesn't mean anything, it's just the person being a fool tricking themselves? Like actually it was useful. More useful than a medicine with no side effects.
I love the placebo effect. I really do.
Yeah.
And if I decide to buy a supplement or I'm trying to buy into a new health regimen, I learn everything about that and I convince myself why I'm doing it, right?
Yep.
Here's my why. This is why. And I don't care whether it's placebo or not. It
Yeah.
works,
Why would you?
right?
It works, right? I don't
That's,
know how Advil works. I just take it
yeah.
and my headache goes away. It could just be that my headache was going to go away. In fact, recently I had a bad sinus infection, and it's that season right now. And I went to the doctor and I said, I think it's been a couple weeks. I think I need an antibiotic. And they said, we're not giving you an antibiotic. And I said, you're not? And they said, look, what's going to happen is you might go to another doctor and they might give you one and you'll take it and you'll get better. And you'll say to yourself, it was the antibiotic, but it wasn't. It was your body. And they gave me Flonase to help with the symptoms,
Yeah.
but they said, just pretend that we gave you an antibiotic today and see what happens. And they were 100% right. Like I'd be sitting here right now being like, good old antibiotics did the job again. I didn't die of a sinus infection. No, my body just healed itself because it
Yeah.
does that. It tends to do that.
That's what the body is always going for, right? If
Yep.
you get out of its way, it will heal.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same respect, if you get in its way, if you think these negative thoughts and you constantly tense up and don't flow and don't open up, it will, shut down. It will have issues. It will.
Yeah.
It's
That's
all, yeah, I love it.
yeah. It's all very connected and very fascinating to me.
I cannot believe it's already been an hour.
I
I
know. I was
just
just looking at
want
the
to
time, being like, geez, we
I
can go for
just
like
want to
three.
talk forever. We might have to do this again.
Yeah, I
Maybe
know. You
we'll
might have to come on my show.
Yes, yes. I love it. So, I just want people to really understand where they can see you, what you're offering, how they can work with you, because I know people are going to connect with you and want more.
Yeah. So my website is ziahassan.coach. That's Hassan with two S's, ziahassan.coach. And I help essentially what I do as a coach at its core, at its very core, is I help people connect to what's important so that they can express themselves in the way that they want to express themselves in the world. Sounds simple, but people get very blocked, and it's a lot of the same things we've been talking about. People talk themselves out of things all the time without realizing it. They think it's part of their brain when actually it's a lie they're telling themselves. It's a soundtrack. I help people break those patterns, and I help people think creatively about new opportunities, new paths, new possibilities. That's what I do at the core. The way that I express that in my current coaching business is I help people with career transitions. A career for me is an expression of who you are. It's a collection of things that express who you are as a person. And for some people, their career does not fully express who they are. And those are the people that I work with. It's really easy to get a job. I know that sounds odd. It's really easy. Like people work with career strategists all the time. They forget that they've gotten jobs before. They've used their same old resume, they've networked and they've gotten jobs. It's happened. And if you keep pressing, you'll get one. And I tell potential clients that sometimes. And I say, if you are just trying to get a job, you can do it without me. You don't need to pay me anything. Just take this advice, go keep trying. It will happen, right? It will. For most people, I assume. If you are, on the other hand, uncomfortable in your job and it doesn't fully express who you are, and you're like, I don't really know where to go next, how to even start this journey, just know it is a journey. It's not a quick decision that you wake up one day and decide to do. And where I start with people is right there, that moment of tension and discomfort. And I coach them through a process where they are really in the driver's seat. And they get to figure out their core values, what's important to them. I have a very long process, not long, but it's a detailed process, helping people figure out who they admire, what qualities they admire, what brings them joy. We actually go deeper than that and do word strings and associations, and that's a core piece of the coaching through our entire cycle. And if any of your listeners want to, I'm offering a 50% off for them. They just have to email me and tell me that they heard me on the podcast for an introductory session. I sell packages. I do relationships with my clients, but people don't often know whether or not I'm the right coach for them. And so I offer one time only an introductory session where they get to evaluate me and see, is this person actually someone that can help, or, is someone else a better fit for me? And just know that when it comes to coaching, you might have a whole mental health team. You might have someone who's a therapist who's helping you examine your past and helping you heal from trauma. And then you might have someone like me who's a coach that's really helping you focus on the future and the current moment and what you're going to do as your next action. Both are extremely valuable and great people to have on your team. So ZiaHassan.coach, you can go there and check out what I offer. My podcast is called Gently Down the Stream, and it is being revitalized. And hopefully by the time this episode airs, there will be a new season that is starting. Hopefully Angela will be kind enough to be a guest eventually on the podcast. And I hope to stay in touch. You can follow me on Instagram, Zia Hassan on Instagram. I post a lot of wondrous stuff on there. So if you're interested in being curious, I also have a newsletter that you can sign up for on the site. I have a long list of things here. That newsletter also includes a lot of stuff that I'm curious about. It started off as one of those things where I tried to promote my service through it. And I suddenly realized that's not me. I'd rather be curious. And the people that I like to work with, they prefer that. They prefer Curious Zia as opposed to like tips and tricks, because tips and tricks to me are abundant and you can get them from anywhere, but actual contemplation and reflection is a lot more rare. So that's what I offer.
I love this so much. I hope that anybody that yes, if you feel like you're not in a place that fits, go to Zia and he will break you out of the constraints. Yeah. Open your mind wide. But you are a systems-based person. You're a professor. You're down to earth. You're not, you're both, right? You're neither nor all everything. And so, yes, I would love for people to work with you.
You might find in a coaching cycle with me that we have a very we get deep really quickly. I like to cut through all the fluff and small talk pretty quickly because, people are paying to be with me. And I don't want to spend time talking about the weather. So we get pretty deep pretty quickly. But then you might find on a different session, we're writing a to-do list, or we're coming up with multiple lists, or we're getting rid of items on your to-do list and saying no to things. So you're right. We bounce very quickly between this intuitive side and then this very practical, executive-minded side.
Yeah, I love that.
I consider myself an expert in both.
I love that.
Yep.
Well, Zia, it was so wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so excited for people to hear this and to get to know you more. And I am a fan. I will be listening to your podcast. All right. I will be following your Instagram. So
likewise.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I hope everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. If you want more from Zia, go check out his podcast. If you're looking to pivot your career, he would be a great resource for that. So go shoot him an email, check him out. Thanks, everybody, and keep evolving on purpose.